Okay, so it's a big question, and you know, lots of people are talking about it all the time. Climate change, is there hope? And people have very, very divergent views. Some of them are very certain that their views are right. And you know, I've studied this question a lot, and my views fluctuate and swing from one side to the other. Um, so I've had a lot of thoughts about it, and I did think, you know, it's interesting because last week we had conversation about, you know, bringing in certainly Jem Bendel's deep adaptation. We were looking at that video of Jem and Joanna Macy, and so he's concluded that on one level, you know, one question, because this can be different questions: is there hope? At what level is there hope? Hope of what? But he's concluded that the most rational view, given all of the evidence, if the question is this society sustainable, or is climate change going to cause a major collapse of our civilization? He's concluded it's the most rational view is that that kind of collapse is inevitable. And he's not talking about, you know, anything that's really very benign. There are, you know, different possible viewpoints that this civilization could collapse and be altogether a good thing. And, you know, it could somehow transition into a much better civilization without too much pain along the way, but he's not accepting that view. And in that video, you know, Joanna Macy was sharing that and saying, well, you know, her orientation has always been to, you know, looking to a possible positive future, to find an optimistic way forward, if you like. But saying, no, it's not going to be, we're not going to get away, we're not going to get a get out of jail free card. If there is going to be some positive future for humanity, it's going to be after we've passed through a very traumatic and really very terrible time. Ecological tragedy, one phrase that was used, and that was the title of the event that Rowena and Adrian and I and the team went to at Gombe Buddhist Center, navigating ecological tragedy. So this is one view, and it's a view that is not, you know, scaremongering, doom mongering. It's a view that many very wise and well-informed people are coming to, and I highly respect it. I've actually signed up for a 7-week, fairly intensive course of living with deep adaptation. So that'll be interesting. That's starting tonight. So I take this on board. You know, I've been working fairly intensively on climate change from 2003 to about 2 years ago. And that was really pretty much my main activity. So I've gone through that period of about 15 years, asking myself this question over and over again. And as the years went by and the carbon emissions kept on rising and the ecological destruction kept on increasing and the political situation looked at from a point of view of the global ecosystem getting worse, and I've gone through different transitions, but on the whole, it's been more and more towards that pessimistic view. Optimism and pessimism are very interesting, actually. And I think optimism is different from hope, actually. I came to that thought this morning. You know, that hope, there's a slight sort of tendency for that to be experienced as something passive. And if I hope everything's going to be okay, you know. Whereas optimism has a different flavor to me. It's like, we can do it. It's active. So Joanna Macy talks about active hope. So, you know, whether or not And we can speculate and do calculations and run different scenarios in our heads and try to answer for ourselves the question, is everything going to be all right? Are we going to get through this? Is the future going, is humanity going to survive? Is civilization going to survive? And we can come to one conclusion or another. But the point is, what are we going to do? So to a great extent, Joanna Macy's response to that is, it doesn't really matter what the, even if we could know, supposing we could know, or that there is an answer now, maybe the answer to the question, is there going to be a positive future for humanity? Maybe the answer to that question, not only we don't know it, it doesn't exist now. That future state of humanity is no more than a mental construct. We tend to think of it as some actual reality that's out there in the future. But that future is what we are creating in this moment and every moment. And so we can't know. I think we can't know. We can't know the future. But we can commit to the vision of the future that we feel is the most positive and life-affirming vision that we can find. So this is really what Joanna Macy was saying. I think, she did seem to, communicate that she thought, yes, we will, or we can get through to the other side of this crash, this ecological catastrophe that is now imminent. But she was sharing with Jem Bandel the conviction really that is going to happen. But nevertheless, there will be something on the other side of it. So I was very glad that, I was looking for things by Paul Hawken, and I'm really glad that I did find that Pioneers talk. The two talks. The first one, very, very uplifting and very positive and life-affirming and so on. But then I thought I need to look at the Drawdown talk, because I know the Drawdown project, it's something that I think is a really critically important piece of work. So I don't know if everybody watched the video. In a nutshell, the story that he tells in the video is how he came to launch the Drawdown project, which is now, the research has been completed and it's now in the implementation phase. And he has been an ecological activist ever since there were ecological activists. One of the very, very first, well, so Rachel Carson was the first, but he was about 2 years after her book came out. So he's really, got a long track record of absolute total commitment, and some of the most inspiring ideas and projects that he's launched. But in 2001, he said he read the third IPCC, International Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, and realized that climate change was, an overarching huge problem that urgently required massive scale solutions. And so for several years, he went around asking the experts, where is there a list of the largest scale solutions, the things that will make the biggest contribution to reducing the carbon emissions and taking carbon out of the atmosphere so that we can get back down to a safe level. And he found that nobody had done that very, very basic piece of research. We just don't know the numbers. Can we tackle the climate problem? Well, unless we know those numbers, we don't know the answer. And nobody had done that work. So this is only very recent. I don't think I can date it actually, because I remember the report came out just round about the time of the launch of the Climate Commission in Leeds, which was, I think, 2016 or 2015. That's when the book was published with the results of the research. So now it's been 5 years, working to actually get those solutions implemented. So he tabulated the research team, big research project, lots and lots of people involved, and they identified and quantified the 100 largest possible contributors to decarbonization, and costed them. And the answer is very definitely, these are not science fiction ideas like filling the sky full of mirrors. These are, quite a lot of them very sort of straightforward, and we know which ones are the most important, and they are all compatible, and they are all, I think, by and large, environmentally sound. That is, they're not producing other negative impacts which are going to bounce back on us. Because, of course, if that's the case, if they do that, then anything that does that is weakening the capacity of the Earth system to respond to the climate problem. So what we need to do is to reinforce that and enhance that. I just think, he's got such a clear mind. He's, really looking at the problem in a very, I don't know, just the methodology, that how you analyze a problem, the way that you go about analyzing a problem has a huge impact on whether you come up with sensible solutions or not. And I think he asked all the right questions, and they've come up with a very, very, very good set of answers. So if you listen to that talk, I think you'll find it hard to disagree that he does, you come out of it feeling more hopeful, in fact, very hopeful. And there's an amazing image that I never thought of this, So how big, as a three-dimensional sphere, is the whole of humanity compared to the Earth? And it's literally a pinprick. If you took an orange, the ball of humanity is not the head of a pin. It's 10 times smaller than that compared to an orange, right? So literally the point of a pin, that's us. And the carbon is a little bit bigger. It's 6 times the diameter, so that's 200 times the volume. But nevertheless, very, very small on the scale of the Earth. And that really does give you a sense of, oh, okay, hadn't looked at it like that. So, there it is. I mean, the technical problem, I find it entirely convincing. It's not a matter of discovering some wondrous new scientific invention or even a new, permaculture idea that we haven't come across yet. It's not that. The problem is, and I more and more, for years I've focused down on this, and this seems to me to be the whole essence of it. The problem, and we all really, I think, know this, the problem is political will, in quotes. Okay, whatever that means. Now, that's a very interesting question, what it means, because what it really means, we talk about political will and we think of governments. Well, of course, they are an important component. But really, what we're talking about is the ability of this human superorganism, global society, the collective mind of humanity, to come up with a response that is in alignment with the needs of the ecosystem, that is fundamentally life-affirming way of being, thinking, and acting as a collective, world community. So this is what needs to happen, that this ecological consciousness needs to become general. It needs to become the mainstream. It needs to become the dominant element in our human society, and it's the collective mind of humanity, and that's not just the arithmetic sum of all the individual minds, because our society is not just an amorphous mass of human beings, it's highly structured, and the channels of communication and what we call command and control, in information theory, the ways that information flow and the type of communications that influence how people act, and the collective projects, collaborative projects that need many, many people involved and need resources, the way that those are organized need to be in alignment with the needs of the ecosystem. So that's One way that you can look at it, from the perspective of Gaia theory, a lot of the thinking in Gaia theory is around what is self-organization? How do complex systems come to organize themselves so that they enhance their ability to persist, if you like, their ability to survive? We're talking about living systems. Living systems are complex systems, and it's a very fundamental characteristic of living systems that they have this inbuilt capacity to respond to changes in their environment, in their situation, in adaptive ways, in ways that maximize their chances of survival. Now, clearly, the human species as a whole at the moment is not doing that. We have been acting in ways that are very contrary to our own prospects for survival for some time. Now, how is that possible if it is a self-regulating, self-organizing system? Well, of course, it can happen because circumstances change and one mode of behavior becomes unsuitable for a different situation. So it may be that the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution in the 18th, 19th centuries were forwarding the prospects for humanity, and even on into the 20th century, all the things that I talked about. Clearly, they are industrial and then the technological revolution. Probably the 20th century should talk more about the technological revolution rather than the industrial revolution. And those things, agricultural revolution, industrial revolution, technological revolution, layer upon layer of complexity of organization, adding power to the collective human organism to be able to create change. But those modes of action, those forms of behavior and those ways of using, harnessing the resources of the earth, when they get to a big enough scale, suddenly they are the scale of those things which have not been invented, thought out in terms of an ecological understanding, an ecological worldview, if you like. There was no Gaia theory didn't come into how James Watt thought about the steam engine or anything. That it was how can we bring the benefits of the energy that we're harnessing to improve the quality of human lives. So the ecological view was very much in the background, and it's really an anti-ecological view that arose. I'm going to be quite sort of slightly flippant here, say I blame Isaac Newton and Galileo and Descartes. It's very interesting. Those three, I want three pivotal thinkers of the scientific revolution of the 17th century. Think about it. Descartes was a vivisectionist. He believed that animals were machines, literally. And he thought that animals did not experience pain. He thought they weren't conscious because the human, and he was influenced by his Catholicism, that the human being has a soul, has a consciousness. The animals don't have that. And there are many modern philosophers who also think animals do not have consciousness because they don't have language, so they don't have conceptual thought, so they don't have minds, so they're not conscious. This is the reasoning. This is a Cartesian worldview. Galileo, it's interesting, really one of the pivotal figures, certainly in our understanding of how to use mechanical energy more effectively. What was his profession? He was a military engineer. His theory of gravitation that was revolutionary was thought out in his attempts to understand better the flight of cannonballs. So we have vivisection, we have military engineer. Isaac Newton, I don't think directly involved in any of those things, but he, we talked about the left brain, the right brain, and the left brain, somehow, the left brain thinks mechanistically, mechanically. Newton was very like that. He had he had incredible insight into mechanism, but his philosophy of the natural world. I mean, he was also a theologian, different kind. I don't really know much about his theology, but his understanding of nature was that nature is a machine. And that then became the dominant worldview. And when that worldview becomes so powerful, as it did in the 19th, 20th, and now 21st century, it's become incredibly powerful in the world. It comes up against the reality that, as you know, I say the reality, I mean, you know, we have a different perspective now through Gaia theory and all of the other kind of ecological sciences, if you like, and the kind of mathematics of complexity theory and so on, that understands this world not as a machine, like a, you know, a clockwork thing with linear causality, one thing causing another, which is the way that mechanistic thinking works, but in terms of an interacting, interdependent web of, when I say life, you know, but life itself. How do we understand what life is? It is through this absolutely through and through interdependence. Every, you know, every particle, every cell of your body responds to the actions of every other cell. Every organism on the planet interacts with every other organism. The whole thing, as I think was it, well, it was Natine mentioned, yeah, you know, that not only the living organisms, but also what we think of as the non-living parts of the earth. I don't know if that came across in my talk on Gaia theory, or you understand, you know, how the atmosphere, the current, you know, the jet streams and the water cycle, the transport of water from the oceans through the clouds to the rivers and so on, all of these things, and the movements even of the Earth's crust, the rocks of the Earth, all these things are not at all separate from the interaction of living organisms. Are totally integrated as one single system, and none of those things, you know, the Earth's crust would not be the way it is now if it weren't for living things. The whole Earth would be totally different. So it is one living entity of unbelievable, almost infinite complexity, and we can only understand it as an interacting, interdependent living system that responds adaptively to changes in its state. So those who've been talking about, you know, is the Earth kind of having a cold and it's going to sneeze us off? You know, are we a virus? This is right, except that it tends to make us and the Earth separate. You know, and of course, if I have a virus, I tend to think of me and the virus as separate. I'm sure, you know, it's the case that I could not live without any virus. I don't actually, you know, don't know enough biology to know this, but I would bet a dime to a dollar that just as I know for a fact that I could not survive without many different species of bacteria in my body and many billions, even maybe trillions of bacteria that form a part of the ecosystem that is me, you know. Also, that's true of the viruses. Now, some of them are sometimes dangerous to me as an individual. They may not be dangerous to life as a whole, though. It's not like that COVID-19 is, because it's dangerous to some humans, it's not necessarily, in the long term, a bad thing for humanity as a whole. It may be part of the evolutionary process we need to go through. It's very difficult. We don't know. So humans are like that, you know. If we damage the Earth system too much, then Gaia theory tells us the very obvious thing that we will become extinct, and then that problem will go away, and the Earth will return to some kind of balance. Many other species may go extinct in the process, and the ecosystem may go through a very turbulent stage, and then it will settle down in another stable condition. We have no idea what that might be. But I don't think, even in my pessimistic moments these days, I don't think that the human race is going to become extinct. There are many people who do think that, you know, but I think that's extremely unlikely. My most pessimistic scenario is roughly the one of James Lovelock, which is that we will create very, very serious climate change, and humans will be driven to the polar regions, and they will survive in what, compared to now, small numbers, but we're talking a few 100 million humans. And eventually, we will thrive again, and we will spread, and human history will continue. But that's an extraordinarily traumatic, and we cannot even, in our wildest dreams, our imagination will not stretch to how terrible a period of trauma that would be. The scale of death, disruption, and so on. Now, many people are convinced that is inevitable. I don't think that. I think that the problem comes back to political will, and this is what I've been banging my head against for years. In terms of not so much, that I've been as very courageous people like Greta Thunberg and Polly Higgins, going and confronting the politicians and saying, why don't you change your ways? I haven't done much of that, but I've done a lot of thinking about it and come up against a brick wall all the time. So I don't know how to change the mindset of the people who are making the decisions, who are continually prioritizing short-term profit over the continuance of, the chance of survival for humanity. That is the most irrational thing I can possibly imagine. But that's what's been happening. So now is the hope for a change there. And here I think, I now begin to think, yes, I'm feeling more hopeful about that. Whilst the prospect of climate change is becoming more and more imminent, and if we look there, it looks more and more terrible, our prospects. But if we look at what's happening of the dynamic of the way the human collective mind is moving, then I feel more hopeful. Even though, we have Donald Trump in the White House and Boris Johnson and so on, we have many terrible politicians leading our major nations. In fact, it's become general now. Most major countries seem to have pretty unpleasant right-wing governments. I don't know whether the Chinese government is right-wing or left-wing. It depends how you define your terms, but the problem is the same, isn't it? So those existing political structures are not getting better, but I think they're getting less secure and stable. I think that from below, something different is happening. And this Paul Hawken writes about and talks about very eloquently in his other book, Blessed Unrest. And I do recommend that book, which is, his analysis of, he became gradually aware, hello, these organizations that are working for social justice and ecological, harmony and so on. There's an awful lot of them. Nobody knew how many there were. Again, so he did a research project, found out. And after some time into this research project, he thought, this is extraordinary. There seem to be about 150,000 organizations like this around the world. And that's a huge number. They must be having a big impact. But he continued the research, and actually he found at the end of the day, he found it was more than 2 million organizations around the world working for social and ecological change. And that number will now undoubtedly be much bigger now. The barriers have come down because it's much easier now to start an organization, and there's been continuous increase in the number of people. The larger organizations are getting larger and more powerful. They are starting to pack a punch. So, this feels very like what happens when a natural system, especially a living system, is going through a profound change. Is that usually the structure, the overall structure, remains in place while there is change happening, kind of behind the scenes. And then suddenly, very quickly, it flips into a new structure. This is what I think might be happening. We might be seeing, and the COVID-19 situation may be very greatly accelerating this, I think. We talked with the Thomas Hubel, video about, the connection across the world and around the world, that we can even feel and experience. Of course, it's happening on a more concrete level with the interconnection through the internet and these kind of calls, but it's also happening on a more kind of metaphysical, spiritual level as well. And I personally think, and I'd be interested to know your thoughts and reactions, my gut feeling is the tipping point is not far away. And of course, as the ecological crisis worsens, more and more people are woken up to this, and of course, we go through this cycle of denial and so on, all these different responses before eventually there's like, well, accepted here, this situation is real and we need to do something about it. And rather than just burying one's head in the sand and falling into despair, the end point of that journey is that we come out through that tunnel of despair and anguish and grief into action, active hope. And the more people that do that, the more the energy and the momentum, the dynamism of that movement comes closer to being able to, in a way, take command of the situation. It's interesting to me, Greta Thunberg's just a Swedish schoolgirl, but she is a world figure. I mean, she can hold the stage with the official leaders of the world. And nobody's elected her, but she has that moral authority. That's very powerful, and the moral authority of the official leaders is getting less and less. Somebody mentioned to me, I hadn't seen this talk, but that my brother actually had seen a talk about this, where somebody's saying, well, the reason is because more and more, it's a job that no sane person would want, no intelligent, wise person would want to be in that job. Would you want to be in the White House? I think, so it's more and more dysfunctional people who are wielding the levers of power. But that means that those locuses of power are losing their credibility. And although they're manipulating the situation to try and hold on to that credibility and pumping out fake news and things like that, I'm not sure that can continue for much longer. So, I mean, I don't want to, definitely don't want to create an impression that of being a Pollyanna, that everything's going to be all right. I just think it's a very, very open question and a very deep question. And it's not a simple question. It's perhaps not the same question that we think. Is there hope? So I'm going to turn that over to you and tell me what you think about that question.